Hi everyone, I'm Rena 9 and thank you for joining us. For the first time in more than a decade, the House of Representatives held a hearing on reparations today. A congressional panel discussed setting up a commission to study the issue for descendants of slaves. It comes on the holiday of Juneteenth, which recognizes the emancipation of enslaved people after the Civil War. Well, one of the people who testified before the committee is author Ta-Nehisi Coates, who talked about why he believes this is necessary.
The matter of reparations is one of making amends and direct redress, but it is also a question of citizenship. In H.R. 40, this body has a chance to both make good on its 2009 apology for enslavement and reject fair-weather patriotism.
Joining me now from Washington, CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. So, Ed, how significant is this moment for Congress? We're talking about more than 10 years since they've taken this up. Why now?
Well, in part because it's essentially been more than 10 years since Democrats had full control of the House and were able to hold these kinds of hearings. This is something that's been pushed for since 1989, especially by members of the Black Caucus. Never really gotten beyond the committee stage, and even despite today's hearing, doesn't guarantee that it'll ever get a full vote in the House, let alone over in the Senate, because of Republican opposition. But there's a groundswell of support and understanding that this deserves at least thoughtful debate. It got it today. It probably will get it again in the near future, and then we'll see. And there's some understanding among supporters of this that even if it doesn't happen this year, should there be a Democratic president, a Democratic-controlled Congress in the coming years, perhaps there's at least an opportunity to do exactly what the bill says. Remember, what it says is, don't need to start cutting checks today, but establish a government commission that would explore the lingering effects and legacy of slavery on this country and explore possible ways to pay reparations to the descendants of slaves. And it would be up to that commission to sort out the dirty details of how much this could cost, how exactly that money would be doled out, and who exactly would get it.
When you talk about costs, Ed, when you look at some of these estimates, we're talking $6 trillion. Yeah. Has anybody even broached the issue of how this might potentially be paid for?
I haven't seen real detailed studies, but what they've done is sort of taken what the equivalent of 40 acres and a mule would have cost right after the Civil War and adjusted it for inflation. That gets you into at least the six figures, and then you multiply that by the number of people in this country who could say that they're descendants of slaves. This is part of why you've seen some proposals, primarily from Democrats, that say, look, instead of paying direct reparations, why not put together some programs that would more directly invest in African American communities or minority-owned businesses, other organizations to help prop up, communities that obviously have suffered and not enjoyed the economic benefits of many others in the last few years. You heard conversation today, for example, about better federal funding for historically black colleges and universities. If you could do that, they said, that might help elevate some folks. But also important to point out, that was an 8-member panel of witnesses there, at least 2 of whom are opposed to the idea, and they're African American. It's a reminder that, like every other issue, no one community is monolithic, and in this case, opponents or skeptics of the idea of doing this were able to find some who are willing to explain why they don't think it's a good idea. That young author there, who was among the witnesses, pointed out, look, if you give reparations to people, you are essentially calling them victims. And I don't necessarily want to be cast as a victim of something that went on more than 150 years ago.
And when you're talking about who supports this, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell doesn't seem to think this is a good idea. So when you're talking about the logistics of getting this bill through the House and ultimately the Senate, does that mean it's pretty much dead?
Probably DOA in the Senate, at least right now, yeah. But, House Speaker Pelosi has made clear she supports this idea. Anytime the Speaker of the House signals they like something, it usually means there will be a vote on it at some point. But McConnell and Republicans have made the point that, look, nobody who was directly responsible for slavery or for allowing it to persist in this country is alive anymore. Those that are alive today shouldn't necessarily be held responsible for it financially or otherwise. He made the point yesterday, among other things, that, look, we've elected an African-American president. We're moving on. That was met like a lead balloon by many in the hearing room today, and some of the witnesses who said, if we were able to continue paying out benefits to the widows of Civil War veterans well into the early 20th century, then this is something that deserves consideration as well.
You know, I'm curious, Ed, the fact that we're hearing so much on the campaign trail. We've got 5 Democratic presidential candidates who support reparations. Is this a campaign issue that these camps believe really resonates with Democratic voters?
Well, at least a certain segment of Democratic voters, black voters, and they make up one of the most loyal and active blocs of the Democratic Party. So it's no surprise that various groups, through forums they've held, through various pressure campaigns they've mounted, have at least forced a conversation about whether or not the government should be having a more formal conversation about this. And that to them is a good start, certainly not the end. But you have, by my count here, 6 senators who are Democrats: Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren, who support this idea. And among the dozens in the House, among House Democrats who support it, are 3 who are running for president: Tulsi Gabbard, Tim Ryan, and Eric Swalwell, who was at that committee hearing earlier today. So it's just a reflection of not only the support among Democrats, but since there are so many of them running, that there are at least 9 total who support this concept.
Before you go, I want to ask you, Joe Biden's been getting some flack today for his positive comments about segregationist Senator Strom Thurmond. What exactly happened there, Ed?
Well, actually, it was in a fundraiser yesterday in New York where he referenced his work with 2 former late senators, James Eastland of Mississippi and Herman Talmadge of Georgia, where he talked about how he had a working relationship with them that was seen as respectful. Remember, when Biden joined the Senate in the late 70s, he was only a 29-year-old man, and these were guys who'd been in the Senate for decades, and many of them, especially in the Democratic Party, were segregationists. He essentially said that despite that, they were able to work together respectfully and sort of hash out their differences. He has also, in the past, spoken about his work with Strom Thurmond. He eulogized Thurmond at his funeral earlier this century. And there's an acknowledgement that Thurmond's views, especially on civil rights, had changed by the time of his death. But he is getting some blowback for these comments. Cory Booker, who also testified at that reparations hearing a little while ago, issued a pretty scathing statement a little while ago, saying, "You don't joke about calling black men boys. Men like Senator Eastland use words like that and the racist policies that accompanied them to perpetuate white supremacy and strip black Americans of our very humanity." Booker later says, quote, "I'm disappointed that he, Biden, hasn't issued an immediate apology for the pain his words are dredging up for many Americans. He should." So that's a sign that, and this isn't the first time that Biden has referenced his work with some senators who had these kinds of views back in the day. So the fact that Booker, who of course is African American, would now single out Biden so directly and ask for an apology signals that perhaps this time at least, comments made behind closed doors, not on camera, but witnessed by a reporter on behalf of all of us, are going to have to be accounted for by the Democratic frontrunner.
All right, we'll keep following this. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much for joining us.